sometimes also called impact evaluation. It kind of depends, but in these terms we're going to talk about outcome evaluation. Again, back to your logic model, then that part is evaluating, did you meet your outcomes? So if you think about it, did the process that your program went through change the things it said it was going to change? So when you think about your evaluation plan, you really need to plan and design for both process and outcome. Okay. And we're not going to go through all these terms, but again, and this is something we had up in July, there's a lot of different terms. Sometimes the different evaluators actually use them differently, but this is a nice glossary, again, just as a resource for you to either be able to, use some of these words in your applications or understand when they're asking for certain things. Okay, evaluation design. So back to this cycle here. So we start with logic model. Now we're going to get into actual evaluation design. So what do we do to pick apart and dig in and figure out what are your questions? How are you going to indicate movement on those questions? What kind of data are you going to collect to speak to those indicators? So this slide is straight from the corporation. What is evaluation design? So the evaluation design, again, it's a structure that helps you to think about why are you doing the evaluation, what are you going to measure, who are actually included in the evaluation, how is data going to get collected and used, and then how are you going to compare or analyze those data. And this is a really helpful graphic straight from the corporation as well. So the evaluation design process, you see process and outcome, just like we looked at before. When you want to evaluate outputs, for example, then you can pull down and you can think about, okay, what questions are you going to ask in order to evaluate your outputs? How much, how many was produced? How many members were placed in what settings? So generating these evaluation questions is the first step in moving towards the design.
Hi, this is Nikki. Can everyone hear me?
Great, yes. How are you, Nikki?
Oh, good. Sorry.
Good. That's okay.
I just wanted, sorry I had a little technical difficulty getting in. I just wanted to add in on here that if you remember from our workshop in July on the logic model, we had outputs and outcomes on there. If you think about your grant narrative, that you're going to be writing, it's going to have outcomes on it. We think about how do we have that horizontal alignment? We talk about horizontal alignment a lot. How do you take those outcomes? Because eventually these outcomes are going to be put in your evaluation, the table, the worksheet we have, and eventually an evaluation design, which is the longer narrative that explains things. So there is, think about transferability of information as you're going across these different, whether it's a logic model, an evaluation plan, and the like. I just wanted to make sure I explicitly shared that connection, because a lot of times folks I work with don't, sometimes we overthink things, and I'm guilty of doing that. So it's just a nice connection. Thanks.
Great. No, thank you. Do you want to continue with questions? Do you want to keep going?
You're fine. I'll just chime in. I don't have access to click anyways.
Okay, got it. Yeah, just jump in. So some examples of questions. So again, these are right from the corporation. So different examples of questions around inputs. Were resources provided and used? And then around activities and outputs. Did the activities occur as planned? So these questions are around process. Did the model happen as intended?
Another thing I wanted to add in here quick is that the corporation sometimes uses the word evaluation and research interchangeably, and so it's just important to know that these are evaluation questions, even though there's a difference, but the corporation uses them interchangeably. So just wanted to make, again, another direct and explicit connection so people didn't feel confused about anything.
Yeah, thank you, because I forgot to mention that earlier. That Nikki and I are going to use evaluation questions, but you'll see in a lot of the materials that are straight from the corporation, they use the word research question. So
in the link on
yes.
the bottom, in the link
Yes.
in the bottom, it says ask my research questions.
Mm-hmm. So then, you know, other types of questions, for example, around outcomes. So what are the expected intermediate outcomes? What measures and analysis will yield? There are, again, a lot of examples of research questions that the corporation gives. For example, so this is a sample homelessness prevention program that the corporation uses a lot in their sample materials. So you'll see their research question right there. Now I want to point out too that this is their worksheet basically. This is their design worksheet for a process evaluation. They also have an example of one for impact. We're not going to get to that, but this example is for process. So this is the research question that they came up with. Is the program's activity, educational workshops, being implemented as designed? Okay. So when you have your evaluation design worksheet then, the first part of the process, and you all should have one of these from July, but what I'll also do is send one to Jessica, and Jessica can make sure that those are available. This is, if you end up taking advantage of the one-to-one consulting, we're going to really be going back to this and ask you to work through this with us. So what the first part of this process is to write evaluation questions. And in the parentheses, so you see, for example, at the top, research evaluation question number 1. And in the parentheses, that's where you're going to indicate, is this a process question or is this an outcome question? And that'll help you kind of think through, if nothing else, where in your logic model are you going to go to think about what indicators talk to that question or respond to that question. Okay.
One of the other things I wanted to add in is that when you're picking process or outcome questions, I always do, for those of you in education, we call it backwards mapping. You look to see what the funder is requiring and asking you for, whether it be on their forms, on the AmeriCorps website, or wherever else they might ask you to report, and you make sure at a minimum you're collecting data that gets at what your funder wants, because that's what you have to report on, and that's how you're in compliance, and that's how you continue to get funding. Okay. The second level of it is think about locally what you might need, what might be important for your program, your division, department, the organization, your board, the stakeholders. Those are some of kind of the discussions that go on in my head, and when I work with clients and grantees as I think about this. So that's like a multi-layer. What does your funder want, and then what do we need? So it's both at the state level or at the national level if you think about when you're logging into that online website, but it's also at the local level. So that's what we mean by multi-level evaluation. The other part of it is how big is your project, and how big should your evaluation be? How much funds do you have set aside? I don't know what CNCS has, for percentage-wise, if there is even one. Kind of industry standard is anywhere between 6 and 8% on the low end, and if it's a way more robust design, like experimental or quasi-experimental, which this isn't, it could be in upwards of 17 to 20. So in my mind, I always think 8 to 10% of our overall annual award is usually what evaluation is for, but that's just Nikki unofficially speaking from 20 years of experience. CNCS might have, additional resources or information on that. So you don't want to make it too big. You don't want a $30,000 evaluation if you only have, a $50,000 project. You see what I'm saying? So really be thoughtful, I guess, is the main point about the evaluation design in terms of what you need locally, what your funder wants, and then make sure it fits within the whole scope of your project. You don't buy a minivan if you only have you, your husband, and one child. Get what I'm saying? Sorry.
And if one of the things that we can talk through with you in the consultation is which parts, if you decide if you don't have to, but you decide you want to do an external evaluation, then we can talk through what parts of the evaluation you can still do internally. If there's data collection or if there's planning, and that there's some scope questions around that too. Is how much of this can you do internally versus engaging the external evaluator for. So this evaluation design worksheet, so the first kind of task is to think through these questions, these process questions and these outcome questions. All of you are going to, in writing an evaluation plan, should have both process and outcome questions. So then the next piece is, once you have your questions developed, then you think about, okay, what indicators can speak to each of those questions? So what pieces can actually speak to whether or not, or how you're going to answer that question? Now this is all in the context, again, of what Nikki mentioned, that you all are in a position too where you know what data you need to collect in terms of the corporation and in terms of your PMs. So there is some backwards mapping going on from, you've got your PMs and you want those to be part of your evidence base, and so you'll backwards map towards all the way through to what question those PMs can help you answer. We'll get to that a little bit later as well. But so back to this example of the homelessness prevention program, the research question was, for the process evaluation, is the program's activity, these workshops, being implemented as designed? So the things that they're looking at to determine if it was being implemented as designed are A, duration of workshops, B, participant workshop attendance, what topics were covered, and then the members' delivery of the program curriculum during the workshops itself. So those are the pieces they're breaking down. What does implementation mean as individual indicators, and putting that in. So then back to your evaluation design worksheet, you're going to do the same thing. You've got indicators now you're going to think through for each of the questions. Oftentimes there are multiple, there probably should be multiple indicators for each evaluation question. Okay. I want to pause for a second. Jessica, have there been questions? I want to make sure that I'm responding if there are questions.
No, we haven't had any questions yet.
Okay.
But people, please feel free to submit them either in the chat box or by asking a question. If it's very complicated, you could raise your hand and we can unmute your line.
Great, thank you. And we'll have time at the end too if people have general questions. Okay. So now, what data are you going to collect to speak to, so back to the indicators. So you've got these indicators, great. So how are you going to actually say what the workshop content was, or how are you going to actually say how many people showed up to workshops? So the next thing you kind of need to think through is, what are your data sources and data types? So this is, again, from the corporation. So identify your data sources. Is it existing data, like administrative records, program databases? And then identify the actual tools that you're going to use to collect it. Now, all of you already collect lots of data. So you don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. It's oftentimes thinking about the data you already collect and what of it can be used as evidence, and then how are you going to categorize, sample, or analyze that data towards that evidence base. So don't think it's about creating all these new tools or a million different surveys different from what you already do. Really think deeply about the data you already collect, and things that, one of the things I remember talking in our table, one of the table conversations in July, was really kind of brainstorming, what do you already collect that's data? Being creative about what data you already might collect. So a piece of that, and this is, again, we talked about this in July, but this evidence continuum, there's a video on the corporation website that's really pretty nice in talking about how you build an evidence continuum towards what you can say about your program. So I encourage you, it's pretty short, it's just a couple minutes, and I encourage you to take a look at that. But think deeply about how your performance measurements, how are your PMs evidence? So it's not just reporting, it's not that your reporting in and of itself is not an evaluation, but your reporting can build part of your evidence base. So really using performance measures as evidence.
Can I just jump in 1 second here? You're going to notice this in the RFP. If you haven't looked at it already, I really encourage you to take a look at the 2017-18 RFP. The corporation is requiring you to give your past performance data. So if you have collected performance measurement data on an aspect of your intervention that speaks to evidence, you are going to have to provide that information. That is evidence for your intervention. So make sure that you understand how your own data, what you've collected is really informing your program, and is probably going to be a lot more, a lot stronger, or a better indicator than some random study that you found on the internet. So just make sure you keep that in mind.
That's a good point, and I was going to bring that up. It's actually on page 3 of the new RFP. I always like to look at, you look at what your needs are, what existing data you have, see if and where it lines up with the funding priorities. This is just a strategy that I use. And then the national performance measures start on page 3, and there's links in there and go all the way to page 4. So thanks for reminding us.
And so, we put up a screenshot here of Encore that think about the things that you already have to do and then leverage them towards your evidence too. And, as a corporation is increasingly asking you to do that, that makes sense. For example, when you're talking about different program demographics, a lot of the things that are listed in here are really good indicators of a process evaluation. So these are good examples of, obviously they're not applicable to every program, but a lot of these are really good indicators for how you would measure output, for example.
And I really like, and I think because I come from the world of evaluation, this is Nikki again, I really like, I don't know how many of you are nerd out like I do, but I like to lay out the big picture, whether I'm writing a grant or working with a client who is, and I like to see what all of the possible measures that the funder has as we're built, whether if we're writing a new grant or if we're writing a continuation grant and reporting, because evaluation should be part of the beginning, the middle, and the end, not just something you think about at the end. And so one way that I get at it is, I've gone to a CNCS site and I've looked at, what are all the metrics that are possible out there, and it's kind of nice to be able to have them. And as you're working as a group to kind of design, whether it's design the project, design updates for your project, or work on data collection and evaluation strategies, it's a good piece of information to have because you can see what's there, what seems the most feasible, what do you already naturally have in your environment. Evaluation, if it's done really well, should almost be like software, good software that runs in the background. And it should just be a natural part of your environment. It shouldn't be too cumbersome or too stressful. There are going to be some specialty things that you'll need, and that's perhaps maybe where you use an external evaluator or that budget for that. But it should line up pretty well with the programs and the services that you're naturally doing. And if you pick the right ones and you can see what the list is, you can use it, not only for the funder, but locally. I love data.
Yeah, and I think, sometimes just replacing the word evaluation with continuous program improvement, or systematic program improvement helps you feel better about, oh, I'm already doing that. You're doing a lot of this work already, and if you think about it in terms of systematic program improvement, it's again, a lot of you are doing a lot of this already.
Yep.
So again, this is back to our hypothetical homelessness prevention program. Now we shift over. We've got a research question, we've got indicators, and now what data are they collecting from where in order to speak to those indicators? So members report details about workshops in logs. There are observations of workshops. Now who's actually doing that? Okay, the members are doing the logs, but the evaluator actually observes members. A good example of when an external evaluator can really help the competitiveness of an evaluation plan if you're doing things like observations. And then when collected and by whom. So that card starts to kind of operationalize or pick apart and figure out the plans of how you're actually going to collect, those data.
So one thing I'm sorry. One thing I was going to say, as you look across, you see where the gray squares are on. As you look across this, that there's an indicator column, right, that totally lines up with the slide we had up before, which is the process measures as data for evaluation. You can look in there, the number served, the number mentored, these all become your indicators of which you can see that as Annalee and I work our way across this, you can see that vertical connection. And if we had to put a column on the far left before the first research evaluation question column, that would be those would be your outcomes that would sit there, the outcomes that you're trying to measure. Because really, evaluation outputs are great, you know, the things that you produce and did all the resources go in, but what the funder and what evaluation really tries to get at is, you know, the process and the outcomes, the impacts of what is happening. So that's where the emphasis is.
And to that end, just a reminder that the examples that we're giving here is for process evaluation. And again, the impact evaluation of this hypothetical homelessness prevention program is also on the website. So you can go, if you like these good concrete examples, they have them for impact evaluation online as well. So back to your worksheet then.
I like them.
Pardon?
I said those are concrete examples are really nice. It's great for, you know, us webinar presenters to give definitions and talk about it, but what I always felt when you could see an example and concrete example from the funding agency, it's very nice. So good. Hopefully it's very helpful to folks.
All right. So you're so when you're thinking through data sources, who collects it, again, get creative about what you think data could be for your program. Okay, so data analysis. In general, mixed method is best, and mixed method meaning that it's quantitative and qualitative. All of your PMs are quantitative, so you're already collecting quantitative data. Qualitative data, and the way this is really overgeneralizing, but in general, quantitative data is good at the what and sometimes the how, and qualitative data really excels at the how and the why. So think, you know, you need both. You need both of those in order to really get at what's your program doing and what kind of changes is it having with participants. So with the data analysis part, yeah.
I was going to just reiterate, it's really important to have, and I think that Annalie and I both share that, the balance of qualitative and quantitative, because you can have great statistics or a statistical change over time, if perhaps that you see, or increases, you know, what have you in a positive way. But if you can't say why, then you'll never get at the circumstances or the influences or what made it happen, so you can replicate it, you know, replicate it, deepen it, broaden it, strengthen it, scale it up, however. So that why is really important.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example in some of the programs that I've worked with, some of whom can attest, I think, who are on the webinar, that sometimes the focus groups tend to give the most useful data when it comes to program improvement, because you're getting, it's not just one person anecdotally saying, yes, this happened to me, this is my experience, but if you have somebody who's good at focus groups who can pull patterns out from what people are saying and then feed back into what potential program improvements you can make, that's coming from good, solid, qualitative data. So analysis. So you've got data. You've got great data that aligns with your indicators and your research questions, and the research questions are getting at what you want for your outcomes and your process. How are you going to analyze the data? So part of your plan, part of your design is to think about, okay, so in this hypothetical example, they are going to collect workshop logs quarterly. What are you going to do with those logs? So what is actually going to be done with those numbers to say something? In this case, they're going to average the duration of the workshops. So they're going to have an average rate, or an average duration of workshops, an average rate of attendance, and then the frequency on the use of the curriculum. So you can imagine, in the reporting, that's going to be the analysis. That's going to be what you're actually saying. What patterns are you pulling from the data? How do you pull those patterns? So this is process. So this analysis piece, I think, is especially something that could be helpful for you to talk to us about, is on the quantitative end, for example, how might you look at attendance data, or how might you look at program participation, or in other words, dosage, to say something from it or pull patterns from it. So that's something certainly we can help you with.
There's something that I wanted to add into that about qualitative data, because one of the downsides people say about qualitative data, even though it gives very rich and important information, is that it's not efficient, which translates to money because of the human resources that it takes to clean code, enter, and write it up, versus putting there's software out there that you can use for qualitative data analysis. But I like to call myself a blue-collar scholar. I'm not fancy, and I try to offer tools and instruments that are effective, but cost little to nothing. So I have and I'm sorry, Annalee, that I didn't send it out to you and Jessica sooner, but that's something that we could provide to folks. We have an Excel, I just use an Excel database, and I have it formatted already, and you can drop. So like if you do a bunch of focus groups, or if you do, let's say you do interviews or surveys that have open-ended answers, you can literally drop in the data, and I have it set up so that you can code if you're looking for key terms like, I don't know what your key terms might be. It might be improved health, or it might, every time they say that, or it might be increased enthusiasm. I'm not sure what the terms you would be looking for in your qualitative data, but that's something that I have a sample instrument that I can share that could help you get through hundreds of surveys or hundreds of instruments in interviews in a pretty efficient way that are good examples, because I don't know what folks use for the analysis when they actually do it, on site as grantees.
Yeah, that's great.
It's messy.
It's messy, and it's, as you're saying, a lot of time. It's a lot of time, but there's ways. Yes, there are ways to be more efficient about it. And some of you might have some things that you do yourself too, because a lot of you collect logs, or a lot of you collect experiences from members, and how do you analyze text data or narrative data too. So some of you might have some tools as well. So we're not going to get too much into this, but when you're doing quantitative analysis, when you're doing statistical analysis on quantitative data, you have to think about sampling. So sampling is who or what are you going to collect data from? Are you going to collect it from everybody in your program, or just a sample? And so depending on the program, then, for example, your members, you're probably collecting everybody. You're collecting the population worth. But if you serve 10,000 students and you want to collect a survey from those 10,000 students, that might not be feasible. How are you going to sample, or it might be, but how are you going to sample within that? So that's something you need to think about. And then what are you going to do with those quantitative data based on what kind of claims you want to be able to make? So just quickly, 3 different ways of looking at outcome in terms of study groups. So a non-experimental single group. So single group just means you are only looking at the treatment group. In other words, you're only looking at the group of participants that you serve. There's 2 different non-experimental ways in there. One is just doing a post-test. So a post-test could even just be a survey at the end of it that they felt like they gained knowledge in whatever content area. Or a pre-post, only with the treatment group. This is kind of in terms of the what the corporation is looking at in terms of rigor for how are you analyzing quantitative data is kind of on the lower end, because you're not really comparing it to much. How can you can't really make a ton of claims that it's your program that's ending up with the responses on whatever the post-test is, or even the pre-post test. The next is quasi-experimental, is that you do a pre-post test, but with a treatment group, so your group of your participants, and then a comparison group. But that comparison group is not, you haven't selected it randomly. It's just saying you're choosing a group of people who otherwise are kind of similar to your participants, but they're not your participants. So that's called quasi-experimental. Lastly, experimental, which I'm guessing none of you are going to create an evaluation plan with experimental design, because it's, as Nikki was suggesting, expensive and can be really difficult in social services contexts. So that is where you're randomly assigning, you're randomly giving certain groups of people the program, and you're randomly giving others not. So you can imagine in social services context that gets kind of difficult, including education. Okay. This is something you want.
Just quickly, what I wanted to say, because I think it's really good to always be referring back to the RFP, is that if really take a look at how the applications are getting scored and what they're required from our larger grants versus our smaller grants, less than $500,000. Because the rigor is a bit different, but overall, if you look at what CNCS asks for and how they're scoring application, it leans towards sampling. It leans towards probably quasi-experimental a little bit, but I would also say that it leans towards statistics and quantitative, so make sure that you have those things included, not only in your own evaluation plan design, but they're asking for evidence of past evaluations that were done that show that the treatment that you're using or the services, if you will, that you're using actually have been proven to be effective, used in other studies. So this evaluation becomes really important, especially for, scoring and awarding new grants. Pretty rigorous.
Yeah, for the scope. So I want to be sensitive of time. We have about 20 minutes, and I want to pause again. Jessica, any questions that folks have had?
Nope, I haven't had any come in.
All right. Okay, so now writing an evaluation plan. So we talked about, obviously, logic model. We talked about how you go through the process of designing the evaluation. And then how do you reflect that design in a plan? And the plan is, CNCS speak for that section of the application where you describe your evaluation design. So this is what CNCS says is a typical evaluation plan for them. And so this becomes your outline for that section of your application. Program background, your research/evaluation questions, your evaluation design, data collection, analysis plan, timeline, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then budget. We'll talk a little bit more about budget too. And Jessica, maybe you can, is the budget, well, maybe we can get, after we're done with the webinar, if you can talk a little bit about how much budget they have to specifically get into when it comes to evaluation, if it's just a number or if they have to specifically really talk through particular parts of the evaluation budget, maybe at the end of the webinar.
Sure.
Okay, great. So evaluation plans, these are links. I'm not going to go to them right now, partly because I'm afraid of what I won't be able to get back to on my desktop to show you slides. But the evaluation plan checklist is in that first link, which is great. It kind of helps you to go through what all you need to include in the actual write-up itself. And then there's a sample evaluation plan for a different fictitious program called Food for All that shows you what CNCS might expect when it comes to an evaluation plan.
If you have time, one of the things that I like to do with the evaluation plan links that were sent, not only do you use, obviously, the RFP to write and guide that, you can use the checklist then to self-assess if you've included everything. But if you have a colleague who doesn't know anything, give them that checklist or give them the portion of the RFP to read through your evaluation plan section. It's nice to have fresh eyes, new eyes to say, oh, I don't see this. It's not, if you have time. Grant writing always is fun and pushing the time envelope.
Yeah. And that, reviewers, you all know this well. You have to constantly educate reviewers throughout your entire application about everything, and constantly remind and educate, really. So having somebody read it who knows nothing about your program and potentially knows nothing about the program area is a great piece of feedback.
Yep.
All right, we wanted to just highlight, so this was an example of a timeline from the corporation and talks about for your 3-year cycle, so all of these are 3-year evaluation cycles. And granted, this is from the corporation, but I want to touch back on something that Nikki said earlier, that there aren't nearly enough plus signs in this grid for how Nikki and I like to do things. So For example, you really should be collecting data all 3 years. You really should be thinking about, potentially recruiting study participants throughout. So this is I think, a minimum, but in the way that, again, Nikki was describing it as it's software running in the background, that your timeline can really be, especially if you want your evaluation to inform your program all 3 years, your evaluation process, so then you are collecting data throughout all 3 years. You're analyzing it all through. And then the reporting maybe doesn't happen until year 3, but that you're gaining from the evaluation as you go. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Nikki. I know this is something that a lot of you had a lot of interest in after our July workshop.
Thank you. So I think, you look at, when we think about culturally competent, and I actually call it culturally responsive evaluation, which is the next slide, it matters a lot to not only your project, but evaluation in particular. So on the CNCS table where, for instance, they said recruit study participants, words become really important when you're working with different populations, and that could be populations that are marginalized or at risk, a DV population, or rural versus urban. Context is part of that culturally responsive approach that you give to evaluation, and truly to all of the work that I do. It doesn't matter if I'm doing, technical assistance, training, evaluation, or research. I try to be very responsive, and I think the principles under culturally responsive evaluation, and the only difference between culturally competent and culturally responsive is you're actually using it and there's an action. It's great to know something in your head, but it's entirely different to use it in practice and get feedback within the context of your program, or of the programming or the evaluation. But I wouldn't say recruit study participants. I would say stay engaged with participants. Recruit versus engage, it might seem very slight in word, but it means something very different if you're on the receiving end and you have these evaluators or these academics or these researchers coming in. And I always jokingly call myself a blue-collar scholar because I want folks to feel comfortable when we're working together. And I guess if I had to give a shape to what culturally competent or culturally responsive evaluation is, it would be round. It's a more collaborative model instead of a top-down model. And I know that, I'm from the Stockbridge Muncie Mohican tribe, and when we sit and visit in a talking circle, focus group, whatever you want to call it, sitting around the fire, sitting around the kitchen table, everybody gets a chance to speak, from the youngest ones to the elders. And so it's a very round and responsive way. So if you think about yourself as somebody who's delivering program services or evaluation, we have a particular set of skills and a knowledge base, but it's great that we have that, but if it doesn't matter and mesh with the participants, the people in the community, and the context of the community, then what for are we doing it, So I really try to figure out how to kind of blend and braid things together, my skill set along within the community, and kind of blend in. And just, like I said, moving from competent to responsive, I talked about the contextualization of this. How do we engage participants throughout? So if you have a logic model, how does this look to you? As an external evaluator, I say that not only to my program people, but if there's a board of directors, or if they have participants or volunteers that are around. Always checking in and being part of that community helps to build trust and facilitation. It helps people feel empowered. To me, it gives more authentic and valid data because there is a relationship there. And when you have a trusting relationship with someone, you feel comfortable giving honest data. One thing about evaluation too is think about, I realize we have to write our reports in a certain way to our funder. That's very important. But also, what ways is evaluation going to be used? You might end up having just a PowerPoint or some more visual slides, and you're going to use it in a talking circle, or they're having data parties now. I just saw that on Anke Emery, AEA. They're talking about data parties. Now, think about the ways that you would use it instead of just sit down and here's a report. So because we want to make sure that if they participated in, people need to see the connection. If I gave all this time to give you this evaluation data, what does it mean? How do you make it transformative into practice and in changing programs, services, and behaviors so that they can see that that continuous loop of data, evaluation data that's coming is actually making a difference in making programs and services change. And remember, when you come in, the things that you bring in, your skill sets, your life experiences, socioeconomic, name it, gender, orientation, whatever, affects how you are as a professional evaluator. That's all I have, unless there are questions. None, I didn't see any.
Okay. Yeah, you know, thinking in terms of how do you amplify voices, and not through the data you've collected on people, but, you know, how do you amplify people's voices in through evaluation? And any time that you've asked somebody for data, you need to come back to them. I think, again, this is an area that really in the one-to-one consulting too, I think a lot of you that are at the point to really, I mean, all of you can think deeply about all of these different aspects of your evaluation and how cultural responsiveness should be, again, a matrix or, you know, a framework through which you're seeing all of it. So I really look forward to hopefully that being an area that a lot of you are interested in talking more about. Okay. So the last section we're going to touch on is thinking about external evaluators. Corporation, again, has some resources on this, and attend to those, because when you talk about having an external evaluator, they're going to be looking for certain things, such as do they have the appropriate academic preparation, professional qualifications, experience. This is coming straight from the corporation. So what other evaluations have they done? Obviously that they have no conflict of interest with the program itself in question. There's a lot of evaluation going on in Wisconsin. There's the American Evaluation Association itself. You can search on their website. Milwaukee Evaluation is the AEA affiliate here in Wisconsin. They're a great resource to connect with evaluators across the whole state. UW-Madison, obviously you know about WEC. If any of you are in the higher ed context, then we have a counterpart, the Lead Center. There's a Population Health Institute, has an evaluation arm to it, so any of the health-related programs, that would be a good place. You know, our wonderful, wonderful UW system across the state, including UW Extension, has lots of wonderful resources and people, so that's a great place to start too, is with your local UW system campus or local colleges. And then there are a ton of local private evaluation firms as well, or national ones, that you can talk with. And, you know, stay local for lots of different reasons. It's great, and there's, again, people across the state who are really coming with great experience and great perspective on helping you through this program improvement process.
Yep.
So Nikki referenced this before, an estimated evaluation budget. There's a little bit of tension, you know, there's tension in this because what evaluators tend to use, as Nikki had said, as guidelines is what's needed, you know, for a solid, good evaluation and external evaluation. And so it's difficult because a lot, you know, in your minds, you've got a program budget that you probably can't spare any right now. You know, to think about all the funds that can be possibly go towards programming, but understand too that obviously as your evaluation design becomes even better and better, your program will become better and better as well. So the 3-year evaluation cycle, again, we kind of have a 10% of total program budget for these every 3 year summative evaluation, but as Nikki had mentioned, there's lots of reasons why that might go up or down, how much of it you can do internally, who you're using, so lots of different considerations, which is something we're happy to talk more with you about. So in looking for potential evaluation services, there's lots of different things. There's everything from phone consultation to just You can get an external evaluator just to help you design a plan itself, although that's something that we're helping you with through the Serve Wisconsin project. Or develop individual tools themselves if you're looking more to do internal evaluation, but you just need somebody to help you design a really solid survey. You know, you can kind of do a la carte. A lot of evaluators will do that. Then there's also then conducting an entire evaluation, whether it's formative or summative, general organizational capacity building. So there's lots of different services that evaluators can provide, not just somebody coming in and doing an evaluation.
And I think the other thing that I would add to this is CNCS is there for a reason. They have a ton of evaluation resources, worksheets, reports, you know, and you can get a lot of ideas on instruments and different things. Make sure you scour there, because if you have someone who, you know, knows how to do a Google search, which key terms, or go right to the CNCS site, there's a lot of, they've compiled a lot of information that can be very helpful. You know, that they've used in their national trainings, or that their grantees have had, you know, that they keep out there in their big resource toolbox. It's really nice.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I've used it with other technical assistance projects. It's, you know, some of that stuff. It's really good. So don't forget. So we've got some time for questions, but if you're going to jump off right here at the end of the hour, don't forget about the one-to-one consulting. Each program has up to 4 hours of consulting time with one of the WAC evaluators. The link right there is for the request form. Once you fill out that request form, then one of us will get back in touch with you and set up a time for a phone call. And again, I think a really good use of that time could be for you to take what we did today and to work through that evaluation design worksheet, and then talk with us and getting feedback from one of us on that process itself. Could be a really good use of that time. All right.
All right, so thank you very much, Dr. Good, Dr. Bowman. That was a great overview of the evaluation planning. I'm just going to give you the attendees a few updates, so if you can just hang on the line for a couple more minutes, that'd be great. I want to echo what they both said about the CNCS resources. I posted the link directly to the evaluation resources on the Knowledge Network. They're really great resources on there, and I know it can get really overwhelming, but if you want to know about budgeting for an evaluation, there's a presentation about budgeting for an evaluation, and it will walk you from A to B, or A to Z even. There was a question about, you know, what sort of detail you need in your application or in your evaluation plan. There really isn't a lot of guidelines as far as what you need to put into your evaluation plan in your application. But like all the other things that you have to budget for in your application, you have to have a good sense of what things are going to cost. And in order to know that, you need to know, well, what am I going to want out of my evaluation? Am I going to hire an external evaluator who's going to do this thing? How much does that typically cost? And that can give you some good information about what that might cost. And that might be a question you want to ask WAC about. Secondly, definitely use the consulting. If you have any questions about your evaluation, your data collection, your performance measures, your logic model, any part of that we've been discussing, that Dr. Good and Dr. Bowman have been presenting, ask them, because those are very important parts about your application. And if you're really struggling, or you just want to make sure that you're on the right track, this is going to be money to you. So the best use of your time is going to be to work out exactly what you want to ask them, or what you want them to look at, rather than, you know, not having any sort of idea and taking a lot of time just working through the basics that you could do by yourself. Let's see here. So the one-on-one consulting, the link is right there on the screen, on the PowerPoint. I also put it in the chat box, and I've also sent it to you in an email. If you have not been receiving my emails about the 2018 I'm sorry, 2017-18 RFP, please let me know. They're coming from Serve Wisconsin. They're not coming from me personally. So if you're not getting those emails, I need to know because they're very important links and information that I'm going to be sharing through there. Some other quick wrap-up things. This was recorded. I hit record a little too late, so the very beginning of it was not recorded, but we will have the slides up on Wigio as well. And any other handouts or information that was talked about or shared during this time, I'll make sure is on Wigio. If you do not have access to Wigio, please let me know and I can get that to you in an alternate format. Some quick RFP reminders. The 2017-18 application, the RFP is posted. You should definitely take a look at it sooner than later, especially if you're recompeting. There is a mandatory notification of intent to apply that is due September 28th. If you have not submitted that yet, and there are some of you who have not, please make sure that you do that. If you do not submit a notification of intent to apply, you will not be able to apply, and that includes continuation people. So if you're currently competitively funded and you don't submit that, you will not be continuing your funding next year. So make sure you do that. It's a really quick SurveyMonkey survey. It'll take you 30 seconds to fill out. There's going to be some applicant webinars the week of September 26th. There are going to be 3 separate webinars, one for continuation people, one for recompete people, so people who have experience managing, managing an AmeriCorps program, but are not currently competitive, and a new applicant webinar for people who aren't as familiar with AmeriCorps. There's also going to be 2 webinars that Dr. Good and Dr. Bowman are going to be presenting the week of October 10th. Those, all that information will be sent out to you as well as a registration link, so just be on the lookout for that. Serve Wisconsin staff is going to be out of the office next week. The national symposium is next week, so we will all be in the DC area. Dr. Good and Dr. Bowman are actually going to be joining us for one of those days to learn all about evaluation and all these fun things so we can share our knowledge with you some more. And then just one last reminder, it is Tom Devine's last day today. He is retiring, and sorry, I'm getting a little choked up now. So he is retiring. His last day is today. He'll probably be in for another hour. If you want to give him a call or send him an email and wish him good luck. There is going to be a celebration in his honor next month, the day before the opening ceremony, which you should have gotten some information from Amy Porter about. And yeah, so just send him on his way and wish him good luck. And that's all I've got. But yeah, thank you again to Dr. Good, Dr. Bowman, everybody who attended, and we'll get all the information posted on Wigio within the next day.
Great, thank you so much, everyone.